when it comes to being a blue zone, there's no no one really knows what makes people live to a certain age. They usually like to attribute it with like food, lifestyle. And so I think a big thing when it comes to food there is that they do focus on getting more of that local produce, either growing it themselves, or one of my favorite things was they had the local shepherd that would come by every day with all their goats, and you would just like have all the bells ringing as the goats went by the front yard, and that he would go like sell the milk or like his homemade ricotta. And I just thought like that is just such a cute and wholesome way to live. And I'm like, I wish I lived in a place like that.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Mind, Body, Planet podcast. Today's episode is all about eco-travel. We're talking with Ashley, who is the founder of Science by Ashley. And just like her handle would suggest, she talks a lot about science. And inherently, some of that is about sustainability. It's very interesting. I remember a few months ago, she posted about a coffee berry, which is basically the coffee bean is inside of the berry. It's very interesting. Didn't really know that. And so she posts all these deep dives on certain topics. Very interesting. But more recently, she has been just a traveling queen. I mean, seriously, she's gone to so many places from New Zealand at the beginning of the year to basically Europe, a couple different countries in Europe over the summer. So we're going to be talking about that and how she incorporates sustainability and, keeping travel ethical. That's going to be most of our topic for today's episode. We kind of talk about a little bit of everything. So she basically was kind of off-grid in New Zealand earlier this year where she went super viral. And that is just an interesting topic to talk about. And then we're also talking about Sardinia. So she was in Sardinia, Italy, which is a blue zone. And if you don't know what a blue zone is, we're going to get into that in this episode. So stay tuned. Let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Hello, Ashley. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You know the drill. We start with this week's favorites. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I had a couple that I thought of. One is that I know we'll get into it, but I just got home from being away for over 3 months. So kind of getting into the routine, playing pickleball again, which I know is like been a big thing around here in California, at least the past couple of years. So getting into that again has been really big this week. I also had a ton of apples that I needed to get through. And so I learned how to make this yummy tart, and it turned out super good. And now I want to make it all the time. I feel like I'm like a professional baker when I do it. So yeah.
I love that. Do you have a recipe, or was it like something you like kind of whipped up on your own?
I kind of like, it really was just like cut up apples and like the cinnamon and the sugar and the puff pastry basically together. I think there was other things too. I kind of just like improvised, but it turned out well.
Okay, I'm a little baker. I love it.
Inspired by France or something. I don't know.
I know. Okay, so I'm so excited to talk about today. I'll give my favorite, but I'm so excited to talk about your travels that you've been doing for the last 3 months. I feel like there's so much to unpack and just everything that you've learned, and especially with sustainability kind of being a value that you have. And I think that's just very interesting conversation to have. So I'm excited for that today. But before we hop into that, my favorite is that it is October. Kind of a basic favorite, but I just really love the fall. I've always pictured myself as like a cozy girl, if that makes sense.
No, I get it.
So it's like my season right now. Like I just feel like I'm in my prime.
I love that though. It's like sweater weather or making apple tarts where it's one of my favorites too. So I can agree. I can get behind that.
Yeah. And basically the months plural of like June to August in Texas is like just awful. I think July and August was like 100-degree weather pretty much the entire 2 months. And so it was like I didn't even want to be outside. And then we had a cold front come through last week. So now it's like 75. I think right now it's like 82. Cloudy, little drippy outside, a little rainy, drizzly. And I'm like,
82 cold for you?
Okay. No, it's not cold, but it's not 105,
That's true. Okay. I still think 82. I mean, here it's kind of similar a little. I don't actually know what it is right now. I have my phone in Celsius still, so I got to switch that.
She's so cultured.
I was trying to learn it. I always had to like adapt it for the different talking to people. So I was getting better. It's 72 here.
I love that. Okay. I want to hop into today's topic. So, well, I guess first, please introduce yourself to everyone. And then also, if you can touch on your journey with sustainability, that would be perfect.
So I'm Ashley. I'm Science by Ashley on social media like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And I live in California, Southern California, specifically. More importantly, I make content about sustainability and environmental science education. My background's in biology and science communications. And so I'm trying to apply that to social media and video making. And yeah, I've also been traveling quite a bit in my 20s. And making videos about that too. Sustainability journey. I have always been like a science math kid. I grew up like going to like marine biology summer camps and stuff. So I think I've always been inherently like surrounded by really loving the environment, loving to be out in it. I love the ocean. I love swimming. I love animals. And so I think sustainability was just a means of learning how I can protect the things I love. And so I kind of just was doing certain things with my life that were sustainability focused and then kind of moved into realizing that's why I was doing it and then educating on it.
I love that process. I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way, that sustainability is kind of something to protect the things that you love when it comes to the environment.
Well, someone had asked me, like, one time someone asked me on like my Instagram polls, they're like, oh, um, have you always cared about sustainability? Like, how'd you get into it? And I'm like, I really don't know. Like, I was trying to think about it and I was like, I don't actually really know. Like, I just started doing, I look back and I was like looking at pictures from college and I was using like upcycling peanut butter jars and like already doing like the green onion growing things. And I'm like, I just kind of started doing, I don't know why I started doing it. I just did. Like, maybe it's a California thing, but
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I always say it's because of my mom, who was an environmental science teacher when I was growing up as a kid. She's still a high school teacher, but now I think she moved on to like biology or something different. But that's how I learned a lot of like the environmental stuff that just stuck with me. But I always feel like when somebody's like, "Oh, sustainability is not my thing," I'm like, I guess I get it, but like I don't get it, you know? Like, how is it not your thing? I think there's just, it seems like a really big word when in reality it's just protecting the things that you love, just like you said. And I think some people hear sustainability and they're like, ugh, a tree hugger.
granola, yeah, like granola, like, it's like it's a whole personality trait versus like it's kind of weird to consider it being a thing because it's kind of just a way of incorporating things into your lifestyle. It's not like a black or white type situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting that people say that, but teach their own. Maybe we can
Sweet. Yeah.
convert them. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm like, just think about it. Like all the like people who are DIYers out there, that's like upcycling, like using what you
Yeah.
have. You're budget saving, you're saving some money. Like there's all these other aspects to sustainability that are, I think, more attainable or more readily understood than being like, oh, I'm an environmentalist, which just seems like a little lofty.
Yeah, yeah, or, like, people think, "Oh, I have to be," I can't say I'm that unless I'm a vegan or unless I'm being a complete, like, activist going to all these different rally type those kind of things. Yeah, like, I think that's what I think about the topic food waste, which is why I that comes up a lot in my videos, at least when I'm at home, because it is one of those topics that I think even if you don't maybe consider yourself an environmentalist, like, you still wanna save money. No one likes having a ton of, like, gross food in their trash that like drips when you take it out. You just want to, I don't know, like it's one of those things that you don't have to necessarily think I'm doing this for the environment in order to find it interesting and want to improve on it.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Okay, so you touched on your content creation influencer journey. I know sometimes influencers got, a little bit of a negative connotation to it, but that's what you do full time now, right?
Yes, yeah, I've done it for a little over a year now, full time.
Awesome. What was that journey like for you to start posting about that and gaining an audience?
Yeah, so I started just the summer after like COVID stuff started happening. I was actually living in Australia, working as an educator at the Sydney Observatory. So teaching kids about space. Really short time employment there because then COVID happened. And I always knew I wanted to do science education videos. Like I'd graduated the year before from university, had my biology degree, and then some science communication and video making experience. So with COVID, it was kind of like the perfect opportunity to get into it. At the start, I was just like YouTube, animations, a little bit of Instagram stuff, but really that was just like friends and family watching. And it wasn't until I came home, my little brother convinced me to go on TikTok. I kind of decided I'd post a video a day about sustainability for the month of December. And that's when one of my food waste videos took off, and then I kind of just kept going from there.
Wow. So it was really one video within that month of December that kind of changed the rest of your life a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. It was that, and then I was like, "Ooh, like, people like food waste, I'm gonna lean into that." And yeah, I think it was crazy. It was like, I mean, I think it was during, like, more of the TikTok boom era. I know it's a bit more saturated now, but I was, like, my 14th video in, I was, like, posting one a day, and all of a sudden I'm like, "Dad, I got, like" I was with my dad at the time, I was like, "I got 1,000,000 views!" Like, and it's about green onions, like, this is such a random topic, but, like, now I gotta do food waste stuff. Um but yeah, no, it's very exciting, and it's definitely been a fun journey since.
Yeah. So the other thing I've noticed that you've posted a lot, and I know it kind of, well, I don't know, you kind of popped off in the last year or so, was your travel content. So I feel like we should definitely talk more about your travel content. So you spent several months traveling in Europe this past summer. Can you talk more on that experience? What led you to do that?
Yeah, so actually the start of the year I was in New Zealand, and that was when I had a bit of growth as well on travel. It was a mix of, like, traveling and being in one spot, but I really liked the experience I had there, which was in a more living in a more remote place, off grid. This summer, I was like planning a trip with my friend. She just finished her master's, and so we were planning a trip together. And I'd never been to Europe before, and I just thought, I'm already flying over there. I might as well stay. I had the means to, which I was very fortunate to have, and I learned about some volunteering opportunities that were similar to what I was doing in New Zealand, that allowed me to live there for free, and so that kind of led me there, and then I kind of went as I just figured out my plans as I went once I was there.
So just a true spontaneous adventure, it sounds like.
A bit, yeah, something like that.
You could say that.
Yeah.
So when you say an alternative lifestyle when you were in New Zealand, what does that mean for anybody listening that hasn't seen your content before?
Yeah, so New Zealand, I was living out of a caravan, not traveling necessarily. It was more the caravan was basically like a temporary house on a property that we were helping kind of turn over to be what used to be farmland, make it more livable land, and plant some native plants there. And just kind of live, without running water, without electricity at the time, just because it was formerly just barren land. Um, and it was just kind of like a kind of not like shock me, but it's just so different than like living in an apartment back home in California where I am now. And I just thought, I was like, I want to keep learning. Mostly it was cool learning actually from the neighbors because they've lived at this point, they had running water and electricity, but they've kind of been living in this more rural area their whole lives. So just learning from them and how they grow vegetables and where they get their food, and just how they approach their lifestyle. So then I brought that to Sardinia, which is where I did the volunteer exchange, where I did something kind of similar.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like there's so much to, I guess, unpack with that because without running water and no electricity, that must have been such I don't know, an adjustment to live. I feel like I've never been in a situation like that other than maybe like a night or two camping. That's pretty drastic of a change.
Yeah, I did a bit of travel, like, living out of a car before, and I do like camping, so I guess
Okay.
maybe it was just, like, the ultimate camping trip, and we did get a lot of help from neighbors, so I think it was less dramatic as, like, I did make, like, one video talking about it, and there was many other videos before that, like, talked in depth, but if you saw that video standalone, which is the one that did well, it made it seem more dramatic than it was. But it wasn't even because I just, like, didn't include the background information because I was already did that in other videos, but people took it and there were I got a little bit of criticism there, and they're like, "This isn't really off grid, you're on TikTok." And I'm like, "Well, shit." I don't even know what to respond to that, like, true, like
It's like, it's mostly off grid, I would say.
yeah, and I think off grid even in term like, talks I think the technical definition I could be totally wrong here, but I think, like, the technical definition has to do with, like, where you're getting your electricity, or that's, like, a way to describe like,
Oh,
being off
okay.
the grid is, like, running completely on, like, solar and renewable energy versus being on the electrical grid. At least
Yeah.
that's how someone talked about it there. And for us, we didn't really have any electricity, so yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I wanna fast forward into your European trip, which is the most recent one. So it was kind of a spontaneous trip. You were originally going there to be with one of your friends and then just kind of stayed there, hopped around and traveled around. Where all did you go? Tell the people. We want to know.
So in total, I was there for about 100 days. So just over 3 months.
So long. Wow.
Yeah, when I say it like that, I'm like, oh wow, it's actually quite a long time. But yeah, just a little over 3 months. Spent about a month and a half in Italy, and then a month and a half around in the Balkans, mostly in Albania. So if people don't know, because I didn't know much before traveling, but when I talk about the Balkans, that's like Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia. There's Croatia there, and a bunch more too. But those are the ones I went to. Um, and then I ended my trip with my mom and grandma in France for almost 2 weeks. So that was the full trip.
Cool. So one of those places that you've touched on a little bit was Sardinia, which is in Italy. And that is a blue zone.
Yes. Yeah. One of the towns, I didn't realize this until I got there. It's one of the regions there is known for being a blue zone, which is not a technical, like scientific definition, but it's just is like where people live a really long time. And so people are trying to figure out, why do they live to be so old?
What did you learn much doing that? What was that like being there? And I know you stayed, was that your volunteer experience?
Yeah, so basically, after being with my friend, I went to Sardinia, which is an island just to the west. It's in Italy, but it's like just to the west. If you kind of look in like you have like France and like Italy, and then there's two islands. So it's this one. Sorry, it's hard to explain, but if that makes any sense. And that's where I did my volunteering. I worked on this couple's farm, or it was like their property, but they treated it as a farm. They had, chickens and ducks and a big veggie garden, and basically had built everything themselves. Their place wasn't technically in what they consider the blue zone region to be of Sardinia, but it still is similar lifestyle. So when it comes to being a blue zone, there's no one really knows what makes people live to a certain age. They usually like to attribute it with like food, lifestyle. And so I think a big thing when it comes to food there is that they do focus on getting more of that local produce, either growing it themselves, or one of my favorite things was they had the local shepherd that would come by every day with all their goats, and you would just like have all the bells ringing as the goats went by the front yard, and that he would go like sell the milk or like his homemade ricotta. And I just thought like that is just such a cute and wholesome way to live. And I'm like, I wish I lived in a place like that. And they do that with seafood there as well. So yeah, I think like food, and then also just the way of life in terms of having a really tight knit community, um, and just walking places a lot more. I don't really know the exact answer, to be honest, about the blue zone, but I do think local food definitely played a big role into how healthy their lifestyle is.
When you say local food, I mean, is it just like the shepherd walking by, you would use that ricotta and like homemade pasta, like that kind of food?
Yeah, it's I guess like we didn't do much homemade pasta, but they did have like eggs from their own chickens there, and
Okay.
then they would have their chickens would have babies, and the male chickens, which don't produce their eggs, they would raise and then have his chicken at some point. So just very like grow it yourself. One of the really cool things, very Mediterranean of them, is they had their own olive trees, and they couldn't make the olive oil themselves, but they would bring all the olives to an olive pressing place that like this local guy ran. And so then they could make their own olive oil too. So it's just a very like, you're really close to the source of where your food is coming from.
That's so cool. So it sounds very like self-sufficient in a way because you're able to grow your own food and raise your own food, I guess, in regards to the chicken, and then be able to take your food and make it processed because somebody close by is there who can do it, even though you don't have the means to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so amazing. I feel like you don't hear a lot of that. I think at least in the US, I always feel like it's there's more of that in Europe for some reason. And I'm sure there are places in the US that do have that, but I don't feel like it's as talked about. And maybe because Europe is super romanticized on social media. So, of course, everybody wants to talk about their trips and what they learned and who they saw.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I'm talking about this being like on an island and it's in Italy, but then you think about a place like Rome, like you definitely don't have the same stuff going on
Yeah.
in Rome. Like that's more of your like Los Angeles of Italy in terms of like concrete and cars. Like you don't necessarily have like homemade olive oil in the middle of the city. Um, but they
Yeah.
have more like countryside around Europe, I find. Like they're more, I could be wrong because it's just I'm saying Europe. This is based on my experience pretty much in Italy and kind of in France as well, was that when you're in the city, you're in the city. And then when you're out, it's like countryside. Whereas I think in the US, there's so many more of those smaller cities and suburbs and that kind of thing. Maybe that's kind of what you're going towards
Yes.
a little bit.
Yeah, yes, yes. I think I'm trying to connect it to I've never been to Europe before. I've never been anywhere other than Mexico, I guess. Um, so I feel like in Texas, for example, when you're in the city just like you said, but no one goes to like the countryside in Texas. If you're going, it's because maybe you have a ranch. So if it's a ranch or a farm in Texas, it probably has like an oil rig on it, let's be honest. Or you're there and you're raising your ranch animals, but there's nothing else nearby. Like you're very isolated. There's not that same community of people who are able to like bring your olives to and they can cold press it into olive oil for you. Like it's just a little bit different. You still have to go to a grocery store to like pick up 90% of what you want. So the experience that you're sharing sounds very unique, not something I think a lot of people experience in their lifetime. So out of the things that you learned in Sardinia, what were some of the main like takeaways that you learned of how they treat the earth a little bit different when you compare it to coming back to California?
So I'll talk specifically about like the family I stayed with because I can't like apply it to all Sardinians. But I think what was so cool about the couple I stayed with is they were very kind of, you mentioned earlier, like DIY, thrifty, crafty, but with everything. Like the Sardinian guy had basically built up the house himself. He was working on building this pool project. He had a little guest home. He like, and then when it comes to building the house, like how he got the different pieces, I'm working on a video right now about it, but like to build out the veranda, instead of using like all concrete or all new material, he got a bunch of friends that gave him like old glass beer bottles and used that to structure the veranda and then just like poured the filling over it. And
Oh,
like just random, like used old sails from boats as like sunshades for the outside. He was like really good at like mechanics, so he would, fix up a really old bike, like a little motorbike to get around. Just a lot of like cool, thrifty, like using scraps of things to make it into something, which I thought was like so cool. Like you'd be so innovative to do stuff like that.
yeah. You really have to think outside the box. Do you feel like there was a lot of things that the family was doing that you would be able to take with you now that you're back home?
I can't think of any like very like one for one specific things. Like I'm not living in a place where I could use a sail as a shade, as cool as that would be. But I think just kind of the mindset would be really nice to take back. Like, well, one thing is I actually learned how to sew a little bit. So I really want to get into sewing now that I'm here. And just kind of the mindset of like, how can we use these typically thrown away pieces of things and turn it into something that we can use and turn it into something beautiful too. Like I think a lot of times people might look at that and think, oh, it kind of looks like you just put a bunch of trash together. But they did it in a way that it was like the house was so full of color and like so full of life when they did it. So I think changing your mindset of like, it's not just taking trash and turning it into something, it's like what you can turn it into can actually be something very beautiful.
What a beautiful way to say that. I love it. Okay, so you did all this traveling. You were in New Zealand, basically living off grid, not, I guess, technically off grid, but for easeability, we're just going to call it off grid. And then you did your 3 months traveling throughout Europe, the Balkans, Sardinia, and then France with your family. Within all of that, I know you talk about sustainability, and me and you obviously were friends. So this is something we talk about all the time. How were you able to do all of that traveling while keeping sustainability in mind?
I always like to like, okay, traveling is inherently unsustainable, especially when in terms of flights. Like I think that's something that people always will comment on right away is that, oh, you care about sustainability, but you're flying somewhere. And so it's like recognizing that like, yes, that does have an impact. And so like how can I approach this trip and take away from this trip something in a positive way or leave a positive impact that maybe balances out that flight? Because I think the idea of just not traveling as a solution for me doesn't work because it's something I love to do. And I think I always learn a lot while I'm traveling that I bring home and it changes my mindset when I am home. When it comes to sustainability and travel, in addition to like recognizing that flights are an issue, in the past, I think my perspective on it has kind of evolved over time. When I first was traveling, I really was thinking about, what products was I bringing? Am I people usually go to Target or Walmart or wherever and get like the mini sample size things of everything. And so I'm like, okay, how can I change that? Like, how can I upcycle, old containers and put my current product in it? Or how can I try out, shampoo bars or hand wash sheets or just all these like different things that people do in terms of products, not using plastic bags, using reusable ones. And I
Mhm.
think that's very important. But I think over time, my perspective on like what classifies sustainable travel turned into, it's not just like, let's go from place to place to place and take a bunch of flights and travel and see how many countries I can hit. It's become more of this slow travel mindset of like, how can I learn from the people here? How can I connect with them? How can I learn about the history? And just what can I give them and what can I take away that I can bring home and try to have a positive impact or change what I do back home? And then also just in terms of like transportation while I travel, like all the little things as well. Like I tried to challenge myself and see like, could I take no flights once I got to Europe? So instead of taking a bunch of Ryanair flights, or any other budget airline, which are inherently cheaper, especially even than trains, which is so crazy. It's cheaper to take little flights, but can I stay maybe more in a central location? Like, can I just work my way through Italy, take overnight ferries, take an overnight ferry to get over to Albania, those kind of things, instead of just flying everywhere and getting to as many countries as I can.
And were you able to successfully do that?
For the most part, yeah, it was challenging. I think when I was with my friends in the beginning, we did do one flight from France to Italy, and then when I had to rush and get over quickly back to my mom and grandma, I did one. But within 3 months, I didn't do any flights, which I was like a little proud of. But it's not to say it's a problem to see like a ton of countries, but I especially like I'm very privileged in the fact I've been able to travel a lot, and so I'm not really in a rush to like see as many countries as I can. I've started enjoying being in one country for a long period of time more. So it's not to say it's bad if you go to a lot of countries. I want to like just say that. But I have realized how much more valuable it is for me to stay in one country and not be jumping around as much.
I think it does make sense. It's just a different experience. I think when you are in the mindset of trying to hit a bunch of different countries and see them all, you're not really absorbing it. You're not really taking into account all the cultures that you're really seeing. I think they start to get maybe jumbled in your head a little bit, or you're not really I don't want to say this is the case for everybody, but I can see how when you're hopping around like that, it can feel like you're not really respecting the places that you're in versus actually taking the time to have a longer trip in one place and actually getting to know the people and have conversations with those people and learning what life is like for them and how you can kind of, I guess, learn from each other as a tourist and a local.
Yeah, and also like when you only have so many days to spend in a place, you're going to hit kind of those like top bucket list items that are known for the place, which is, where a lot of tourists will frequent,
Mhm.
which is fine. Like it's, when I go to France, I want to see the Eiffel Tower. Like it's not a bad thing to want to do that. But I
Yeah.
do think, staying in a place for a couple days versus a couple weeks, you kind of start to, get off the beaten track, see these other things that are less frequented, and it just is a different experience. Also, maybe you start learning the language a little bit more, or you take the time to learn the history. And
Yeah, I can totally see that. So, in your experience from when you were taking flights from one place to another versus taking like a train or an overnight ferry, what was that experience like? What was the difference in that? Obviously, I guess the flight would be quicker.
yeah. So the time I did the flight, it was from France to Italy, and yeah, I mean, it was quicker. It was really pretty. I got to see over the Alps. I think one thing with this is like kind of random, but like with budget airlines is you see it's cheap, but then you have to pay for your bag as well. So really it's not that
Mm.
cheap. So how I looked at it when it came to like something like an overnight ferry is it was like the price of the transportation. I didn't have to pay extra for my bag. And it was the price for accommodation that night. So I was like, wow, it's actually such a good deal. However, it is an overnight ferry. Like, it's not going to be the most comfortable thing. I did three different ones, and like one of them was fine. I found myself a little like I couldn't book a room, so you kind of just like find yourself a little like couch in the eating area, and like people all rush
Oh,
onto the on the boat as fast as possible to like claim their spot. And so it's a bit of like craziness, and they leave the lights on all night, so like my eye mask was like key. But it was an experience.
that's so cool. Okay, so it sounds like most of this trip was solo travel. You didn't really have someone with you this entire time, right?
Yeah. I did 2 weeks with my friends and ended 2 weeks with my family. But other than that, pretty much all solo.
Was that have you solo traveled before then, or was that your first time?
Never like for that long of a period of time. So I was a bit like nervous going into it, especially when my friends were leaving at the beginning. I was like, crap, what did I get myself into? Like I started like getting really anxious about it. But then once I started, honestly, like you meet, especially in the Balkans. The Balkans for me were like the typical like budget backpacker experience where like you meet so many other solo travelers and like make such good friends along the way, and you end up like pretty much traveling with people you just met for a few days, and eventually you split off and then maybe you meet up again, and um it was just a really fun way to like meet people, and I feel like I like got closer to them over like a few days than I do to like people I've known for years. So it's, I don't know, it's just a really cool, I would recommend solo traveling to anyone.
Really? That's so cool. So it was scary at first, but it's if you meet people, is that kind of how things get a little bit easier?
Yeah, and like staying in hostels is huge in terms of meeting people. And you can kind of like approach a hostel, like say you want to be antisocial, like you don't have to meet people, but like if you go in, just say, break the ice immediately, say hey to whoever's in your room, maybe go to the common area, like you can meet people really quickly, because most of the time like they're trying to meet people too. It's like unless they're exhausted. Sometimes I would get to a hostel and just be exhausted and be like, I need a day to myself. But that's kind of typical with anyone. But yeah, like it's everyone's so friendly. Like everyone wants to meet people. So, and I don't know if there's like been a study about how this part specifics of this, but apparently hostels are actually very sustainable compared to hotels.
Really?
Um, Not compared to like if a hotel is like an eco hotel, like maybe they're better, but because you have so many, if you think about like the amount of space you have and the amount of people you have in the space, first of all, you're using a lot less space, which is a lot less resources in terms of things like electricity, air conditioning, anything like that. Also, it's not like we're going to wash your towels and sheets every day like a hotel would be like, so it's a lot less adding that factor in and using all the washing stuff. None of those like mini bottles of products. So it's like you're a lot more self-sufficient, but it has like, if you're in a position to be able to stay in hostels and like you are a bit younger and you want to meet people and you're solo traveling, it's I think better for the environment, and I would really recommend it. I don't know. People are scared of hostels and I don't think they should be. I've been using hostels since 2018, I think, and I've never had like a terrible experience. So
Yeah. Okay. Put it on my bucket list. I know the volunteer work exchange that you did, that was through a company, right? Where you were able to find that person, there were background checks and everything like that. It wasn't just like a Google search, right?
yes. Yeah. So it is nice because they're checked and you're checked as well. So it's not like you're getting yourself into like a sketchy situation.
Hmm.
And like we chatted on the phone beforehand as well. But yeah, World Packers is the app. I had seen it a ton at the start of the summer before traveling, like people using it. It's kind of like Workaway, if you've heard of it,
Hmm.
but just kind of like a newer one. And you can find things like I did the farm exchange thing. I also did another part of my trip in Albania. I worked in a hostel for a couple weeks. So I just worked like reception and did some social media for a hostel. You can do like a variety of things, and I don't know. I think it's nice. You basically get to live there for free and sometimes get food for free and bikes or tents or whatever things they have to offer in exchange for you working like 16 to 25 hours a week.
Okay. So basically, part time job in exchange for a place to stay.
Yeah, which sometimes you might think is like, oh, maybe it's not worth the exchange, especially if you're living in a more budget friendly area. But for me, it was worth it just in terms of kind of being like when you're traveling and moving place to place, it's kind of nice to be in like a stable location for a couple weeks and just be around the same people, kind of fall into a little bit of a routine to get your energy back to like keep going from place to place again.
Yeah. Like a recharge period.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I love that. It's super cool. Okay, so out of all of the traveling that we've talked about and your recent experiences, you said that your perspective has changed. It used to be that you wanted to do all of these like sustainable like swaps and things and bring all like the extra like I don't know, like reusable bags and things and put those in your backpack. But now you've realized it's more about using what you have on the trip, not necessarily bringing everything from home for your trip.
Yeah. I think this comes up in sustainability at home and travel anywhere, but it's kind of the idea of like buying products to be more sustainable, which is like inherently like encouraging that consumerist mindset, which isn't super sustainable. But of course, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I'll use like dryer balls for an example. Obviously, you don't use them while traveling, but like you buy dryer balls once, but then you don't ever buy dryer sheets again. So that's a reasonable switch. But it's not
Mhm.
like I need to buy all these things right before traveling in order to be sustainable while I travel. So, like, for example, ended up like a couple times I ended up with like a plastic bag while traveling, just like a thin one, maybe from the grocery store, maybe somewhere, maybe it came a bag of carrots, something like that. And I ended up using that to wrap up my shoes while I was traveling to not get the dirt on the rest of my clothes. I'm trying to think of other things too. Using like little containers. A lot of times people will buy full size bottles of like body wash in a hostel and then leave it behind because maybe they have to fly somewhere. But so like getting like if you run out of a product in a container, keep that little container that you have and then like use some of the body wash, put it in there instead of ever buying something new.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway because I do see a lot when people travel, they feel like they have to buy like a whole new wardrobe or buy new shoes to walk in, buy a new, I don't know, carry on suitcase instead of the one that they have been using for the previous couple of trips they've done. I always feel this mindset. And I guess it's because you're doing something new. Obviously, you're not like probably going to Europe multiple times a year, I would assume, for the average person, let alone once a year for the average person. But it is definitely something you see, especially on social media. Like, oh, here's my haul of new clothes. And I just did a podcast recording about haul culture and how much I hate it because it's just annoying. But I love your takeaway of just using what you have. You don't have to buy a brand new pair of shoes. Just wear the ones that you have. I mean, unless they're falling apart and you genuinely need a new pair of shoes. But I would say most people probably are just buying them because they want new shoes.
Yeah, and honestly, I found the stuff I brought over that was because I mean, I had a couple things, like, I had a pair of sandals that I was like, I can't wear my flip-flops in Europe, I need to, like, have a cute pair of sandals," and so I did go out and try to find a pair of sandals and, like, brought it, and then I just never wore them the entire time, and I was just like
Yeah.
I was just like, "Okay, this is such a waste." So it's like I end up wearing the things that I already know I love,
Mhm.
or, I went thrift shopping in Italy and got a dress that I ended up wearing a bunch of the trip, like, something
Yeah.
like that.
Okay, so we might have already talked about this. So if we did, no big deal. But I want to know your biggest myth of sustainable travel that you have had to debunk up to this point in your life.
Maybe it's not the right answer in terms of, like, myth, but I think just the fact that you shouldn't travel if you care about the world, if you care about the planet, if you care about sustainability, you shouldn't travel at all. Yes, as I agree with, like, flights are inherently unsustainable, but if you can have a more positive impact, if there's something that you can bring back from what you learned, or if it just shifts your mindset in whatever way, then I think it's beneficial. I think, like, one of my big things I try to encourage in terms of, like, caring about the environment and caring about sustainability is you kind of got to get out there and you got to experience the world. Because like what I said in the beginning on like why I learned to care about sustainability is I wanted to do it in a means of protecting what I love. And so if you don't ever get out, maybe you don't realize that you love certain animals or certain, maybe you don't go on this hike that realize like how beautiful this area is. I think just getting out in the world is a really important thing to do in order to want to protect it.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. So you're saying like there's merit in people saying you shouldn't travel ever. You should only like you basically you should never get on a plane. I feel like is the argument I hear because of jet fuel and the carbon emissions. So there is merit to what those people are saying, but the benefits of traveling intentionally and learning cultures and actually taking the time to bring that knowledge with you back home can outweigh the con of having to get on a flight.
I think, like, there's no exact scientific, mathematical equation to really, like, prove that, but it just in the general
Yeah.
scheme of things, yes. And in terms of flights too, like, there's ways you can now Google Flights, it's cool, they'll, like, talk about emissions when you're searching for them, which I think is really unique. And, like, I've kind of looked into things too in terms of, like, apparently layovers are less sustainable, but then I did one at one point, and because of the plane they were using, it actually was more sustainable because like, airlines are working to just do different things that are better for the environment. So it's just been like, I mean, I'm not trying to like greenwash, like planes are still planes, but like, it's interesting learning, why are some better than others, and trying to be like at least a little bit more conscious when you're choosing your flight, if you can. Sometimes the price outweighs the what you can see.
Yeah. I forgot that they started doing that now on Google Flights where they do the emissions, which is very interesting to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always like, as much as I'm like looking at what's the cheapest flight a lot of the times, I'm also like, I do take that into consideration. I see that and I'm like, oh, interesting. I wonder why this one's more. And like, you'll see one for Spirit, but it has 3 layovers. And you're like, okay, no one wants to take that in the first place because it's 3 layovers, but also like taking off and landing are some of the most fuel intensive parts of the trip. So, it's not good for the environment either.
Okay, so what is your advice for someone who has any upcoming traveling plans?
If you don't have everything planned out already, see if you can stay in a place longer. Like if your original thought was that you'll jump around, if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to Europe and I have a flight there and I don't have any plans after that, maybe instead of thinking like let's go to 20 countries, maybe think like, let's see if we can stay in a country longer and really enjoy it. If you have the time and luxury. If you have already booked, don't feel guilty about booking a lot of places. When you are in that place, really take into account, how can I learn about this place? Maybe go out and try to talk to locals versus only talking to other travelers. Try local foods. Don't buy from chains. I also would say don't buy a bunch of things right before you go and travel. You'll find things like my mom said, you'll get things when you're there. Trust me, like pack less than you think. Try not to bring too much plastic. Don't litter. It's like a big thing, respect the area that you go to. And if you're going to hike, bring hiking shoes because I brought Tevas and the hiking man was made fun of me a little bit and then gave me hiking shoes to borrow. So yeah, so be prepared in terms of hiking.
Great advice. I love all of it. I think that's all great because I think just eating local food, shopping local places, even for people that maybe already have their plans or their flights, all of their stuff is already scheduled. There's no way to kind of change that to be longer in one place. There's still ways that you can incorporate what we've talked about on trips where you're hopping around. It's just being more intentional with what you're choosing to do with your time.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's something you can take into your future trip too. Because I think the reason I got into the slower travel is because I kind of had experienced the faster stuff as well. So it's not to say like don't ever do that, but it's to say maybe try it out because it's actually really nice.
All right. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Ashley. Please share where everyone can find you.
Thanks for having me. I'm Science by Ashley on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. All the same name.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. Have to have you on again. We can talk about other science related things.
Yeah, I know my name's Science and I'm like talking about travel and sustainability, but
Eh.
how the path takes its way. Uh,
I love it. I love it though.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much for having me and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks. Whoop. We have made it to good climate news. Today's article is titled Apple to Drop Plastic Packaging by End of Next Year, No Leather Cases for iPhone 15. As always, I find it interesting to see more and more large scale brands introduce more eco friendly initiatives. And I feel like this is amazing. To completely drop plastic packaging by the end of 2024 is so I hope that they become like the instigator in this space for more companies to kind of adopt these practices. And it's also very interesting that they're moving away from leather. They're going to be moving into other types of material that are more plant based for the iPhone 15 and beyond. I think that's really cool that they're transitioning out of that. If you want to read the article, as always, it's in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you've made it this far, please leave us a review on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. It helps the podcast continue to be discovered by more and more people. If you're listening on YouTube, you can go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, do all the things. Let me know your thoughts on this podcast today. I find it was really interesting talking about eco travel. I felt a little bit like, a little homebody because I haven't been to any of these places we talked about today, but it's very interesting. If you would like to follow the podcast, you can follow the podcast at Mind Body Planet Podcast on Instagram. You can follow me at Crystal and Geyer on all major social media platforms. And let's go ahead and make it a great week, guys, and I will see you next week. Bye.